on the cloud. Okay, great. A sense of place. I've heard it said that longing is sacred. A year ago, while living in Portland, I attended a workshop on intergenerational trauma. I was surrounded by strangers, leaning back onto 7 women, each leaning back on the one behind them like nesting dolls. They were each placeholders for the matriarchal line of my family, 7 generations of women back to the first one who left Ireland during the potato famine to brave a new world. Each of those women passed down a different aspect of that loss: withdrawal, anger, anxiety, and each daughter developed a different reaction to how she was mothered. At the end of the line, I have inherited them all, and my body has inherited the longing for a sense of home without knowing exactly where that is. I just know it's not here. One of the assistants at the workshop had just moved to the Pacific Northwest from her home in Cape Cod. And when it was her turn to be at the center, she just lay and wept, her heart spilling over for the wild coastal marshes she had left behind. I thought of the landscape that had inspired Mary Oliver. I thought of how much I envied having such a deep connection to a place. I wondered if I would be able to risk the pain of missing it. After 7 generations, the trauma of separation felt frozen in my chest. It wasn't long before I found myself making more and more frequent visits to a small private college campus a short walk from my apartment in Southeast Portland. I had recently left my marriage of 10 years and was feeling the relief and disorientation of being 35, single, and childless with a new and uncertain career. What drew me to this campus was a river that ran right through the center of it, and that had been restored to its flourishing wild state and was being lovingly and covertly maintained. For the first year, I lingered on the bridge overlooking the river and the trees at the bend beyond. Then in the fall, just as it was getting too cold to explore outdoors, I ventured down to the path along the water's edge. The next spring, I began visiting several times a week. I watched the pale yellow tips of the skunk cabbage push up through the thawing mud, the ducks courting and nesting, the blossoming trees popping. Summer came, and there were heron stalking in the marshes, mounds of lush foliage and side pools with hiding places. One day, I came face to face with a barred owl. And one afternoon, as fall approached, I spied 3 river otter tumbling in the shallows. This place captured my imagination as I pictured myself 3 inches tall, living on a tiny island and rowing a leaf boat to gather berries. At the center of this place was a baby alder tree standing alone on the shoulder of a bend in the path. I'd been mothered by a stout alder tree in the middle of my backyard growing up in a suburb of LA, and I'd always felt an affinity for them. I was frightened for this young one. I was certain some insensitive passerby would damage it, or that the winter would take it. One summer, it lost most of its leaves to something with tiny jaws and an insatiable appetite. But in whatever condition I found it, in whatever season I visited, I would take its slender trunk between my thumb and forefinger and bend close to kiss the place where its first limbs branched from the center stalk. I would whisper words of encouragement and gratitude. At times, my eyes would well. This place made me feel strong. It not only tolerated, but invited all the parts of me. It allowed my grief to decompose. It sent my vision soaring and made my most intimate dreams feel possible. I followed the dreams of that river and its marshy banks away from my career and my home out into the world, seeking pure expressions of poetry and wilderness. I found myself in an intentional community in the middle of rolling farmlands. 30 minutes outside Portland. Despite meditation and service and all the greenery all around, I felt starved. No one supported the depths I wanted to explore, and while surrounded by plants, the hills felt thin, exploited, and quietly suffocating. I searched endlessly for a wild place that felt alive and only found toxic tangles of blackberry and spindly monoculture wheat stalks. In bed one night, drifting to sleep, the image of that river marsh rose startlingly full and lush in my mind. I resisted at first, afraid of being overwhelmed by hopeless longing and despair. But I let the tears come, and with them, the realization of where I felt truly loved. On my next day off, I drove a half day to visit my old marsh, afraid of what I might find or not find. Around the bend, I saw that baby alder, a bit thicker, covered with wide, bright, lush leaves and practically shimmering. As I approached, the tenderness rose up from my belly and spilled over. I took the trunk between my fingers and leaned in, and was flooded by the realization that this was my family. The alders were my family. I hadn't changed my name after my divorce, but the next week I filed a petition to legally become an alder. I haven't been back to the marsh since that day. I came to Northern California for an apprenticeship in eco-psychology and wilderness rites of passage. I began backpacking alone and sleeping out under the oak scrub, but my body gave up in protest of so much fruitless wandering. Within a year, I was diagnosed with 3 autoimmune disorders and withdrew from the strenuous exercise, processed food, and risk of tick bites. The oak savanna hills and reeling raptors, the billowing mists and tule marshes are beautiful, but they're not my home. I dream of the lush, mossy, foggy, and moody Northwest. I know now that it takes more than love of the land to build a home. My new trauma therapist tells me that longing is sacred. It shows us what our soul loves most dearly and the direction of our purpose. She tells me that in addition to learning to fully inhabit my body, I should learn to keep the alders with me always. My heart groans a little at the memory of the pain of losing them, but softens a bit with the idea of what it might feel like to belong internally wherever I go. In this time of solitude and withdrawal, I'm relearning how to love the soil of my body, to tend it and trust it. I'm allowing myself to begin to accept that perhaps this wandering is a generational restlessness in my body, some sort of karmic consequence of all my ancestors because of what they abandoned and desecrated in the name of a better life. Perhaps the solution is to stop searching and belong here, now, to recognize that I am, in fact, not alone, even when physically separated from the wild places I have loved and dreamed to find. This beautiful marsh and growing alder are still there inside of me to help me heal what my ancestors could not. They invite me to allow what I've carried for lifetimes to decompose, to allow the nourishment I need to seep in. I dream sometimes of returning in a decade or two and wrapping my arms around that now fully grown tree. But I know that after all these years, the reality of that marsh isn't what it is in my mind. That place I grew to know from 3 years of visiting, observing, listening, and praising has transcended the physical realm into something mythological. It is now an enchanted place that holds my body, my dreams, my longings, a place where all the others I encountered there can continue to speak to me. It makes me wonder if all places, if all things we let into our hearts become multidimensional, become a part of us at every level, a place not just for our bodies to visit, but also our minds, hearts, and souls. I invite you now to take a moment to think about a wild place you've connected with, or perhaps one you long to find. Close your eyes and go there with all of your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What sensations do you feel? The air on your skin, the ground beneath you. What do you smell? Let this place not just be a memory or a fantasy, but an engaging, interactive landscape inviting you to connect with it. Know that if you visit regularly, even in your mind, Your relationship with this place and everything that lives here will continue to evolve as long as you listen, observe, and praise. And as we begin to transition into group sharing, I invite you to share about a place you've connected with or long to find. How has that relationship changed you, or would you imagine it changing you? How would having an imaginal relationship with it impact you? What does this place reveal to you about who you are and your purpose? And what might it be asking of you?